Hello and welcome to Alchemy for the 21st Century, the Rebirth of Resistance. My name's Gary.
My name is Kevin.
Hi, and we're here to talk with you about current events. But first we'd like to talk a little bit about alchemy. And we have to remember that alchemy is an ancient understanding of the creation and organization of matter that produces a different direction or purpose for human existence. We could call this an alternative paradigm, or use pulp culture and call it a matrix. Now, the question has to be is, what does alchemy do for me or us? And what we could say here is alchemy allows you to see the paradigm for what it is, an invention. And probably the easiest way to look at this is if you have your nose up against the wall, you never see that it's a wall. But if you step back, you begin to see the structure and the possibilities of something behind it.
So alchemy allows you to look from the outside in at the world.
Exactly. And the ancients called this peering through the veils. And what we can say about this is sometimes alchemy acts as a filter. It allows us to see what is not being seen, or the actions behind the intentions, and the possibility of new solutions.
Well, these solutions only come when you take your alchemical understanding and overlay it over the information that you are receiving.
Exactly, because it allows you to see things differently, and that's what it's all about. So let's take a look at that idea and talk about what we talked about since 2011. One of the first things we talked about is that it was never going to be an apocalyptic, chaotic ending.
But what you have is a restructuring of the systems globally.
Exactly. What you have in some ways is a chaotic transitions of change. And I think that's relatively evident that things are changing and they are chaotic. One of the other things that we talked about too is that of the dual economies.
But there seems to be a global economy, one that you see measured in the stock markets around the world. Then there are nationalized economies.
Yes, and like I say too is if you look at this from, if you look at this currently, what you will see that it appears that the East, this appears more favorable to the East because their economies have been relatively newly structured, many in the 70s and the 80s. So it does appear that the East is more suitable for globalization, but yet the Western economies are relatively old and stagnant.
Well, this stagnation serves a purpose. It allows the Western economies, which at one time were more independent than the Eastern economies, time to catch up.
Exactly, and in this stagnation also too it collects the wealth to make the retooling. So what we could say is that the West is in a state of transition, and at some point in time, it'll probably take some time, it will emerge as an emergent economy. So what this means is there's not going to be any so-called economic collapse. And we also, too, are not going to have a recovery because this is not about going backwards. It is about a restructuring and a reemergence or a morphing into something that will support the global economy.
I would agree.
And the other thing that we talked about, too, is the idea of a dual destiny.
Well, the dual destiny is those who create reality and those who support that creation.
Exactly. What we have is we have the inventors of reality and their stratified workforce. And the inventors of reality stay in command by controlling the transmission of knowledge. Only knowledge that is transmitted is knowledge that supports the structure. And we can see this globally. You can see this where all global news networks are using the same model or supporting the same structure. And this is basically, a one thing globally happening. And it appears too that the stratified workforce is divided into what's called the needed or the unneeded. It's not the haves or the have-nots anymore. It's the needed and the unneeded. And this has started what could be called the Ephesian principle. And the other thing that we talked about too is the idea that it is not a new structure, but a very old structure.
It's gone back for thousands of years where you've had a hierarchy, those who support it, and if necessary, military force would be used in order to enforce the will of the hierarchy on the workforce.
Exactly. And what we could sort of say here, if we're looking at this now, currently it appears to be a pre-World War I structure. But instead of having a monarchy, what we're seeing is something maybe a little different.
I would say it would be a monopolistic monopsony structure where the monarchs are now corporatized.
Yes, okay, and this sort of like makes some kind of sense because, again, too, this matches things that happened in the past. It just becomes another name. So it is not about something new, it is about the repackaging of something old. And the other thing that we talked about, too, was that a Eastern power, an Eastern rising star, would have to show its muscle.
And as I said earlier, it would seem that the military intervention was used to bring about the outcome there, but in fact, if you look deeper, it's economic in nature.
Exactly. What we have here is it's not conflict. It's not what it appears to be. There was a cooperation of a movement. And what we have, if we look at this differently, and we know that, many people will lose their lives over this structure, and that's still very, very sad, but probably not necessary. Because what you have here is you have the West moving east, and the East moving east.
And what the West is too far east.
Yes, so what we're seeing here is the complete circumference of the globe by this structure. And this is another purpose, because what could happen here is once this is complete, then it would be able to throttle the global economy.
And that's done primarily through price.
Yes, and I'll tell you what too, it does this through price, but also too what it does, it also controls, it gives an outside source the ability to control what the global economy hungers for, and that's resources, energy, and markets. So non-players will have to play by the same rules. And what we will see is no one country will be able to hog all the resources.
You use price to reallocate the resources.
Yes, okay, and that way it's going to be some kind of redistribution that is not voted upon. The masses are irrelevant in the redistribution.
It's done by some formula that they have derived for us.
I agree with that. That was, and what we have here too, and what we also talked about is the idea that you can no longer negotiate to a better deal.
That's true. You see people out in the street en masse around the world, and nothing really concrete has come of it.
Exactly. And what we're seeing here too is because in some ways the demonstrations, are hijacked. And what I mean by that, if you look at the last world demonstration, what you will see is that the higher prices will be blamed upon labor.
Yeah, that's happening around the world. You blame the victim for what you really want him to do.
Yes, and what does the raising of prices do?
It reallocates the resources.
Because a lot of things are becoming scarce.
Exactly.
And the other thing that we talked about too is that it is the masses that produces change.
Yeah, a lot of the ideas begin at the bottom and go up in a perfect world. When you have only the creators giving you their definition of creation, you have no new ideas.
Exactly, it becomes stagnant. So what we're looking at here, it is when the masses see something new or something better that they begin to move toward that and change. So what I'm talking about here is the idea to understand movement in the 21st century, you must have a thinking pattern that matches that. And if you find this interesting, take a little time to go to our website because we go into this in more detail. So we want to thank you very much for your time.
Thank you.